There is a frequency that only opens after midnight. Most people spin right past it, a wall of static between the stations. But if you stop, if you hold there, sometimes a voice comes through. And some of those voices have been gone for a very long time. Welcome back to the midnight frequency. Turn the lights down. Put the world on hold. For the next few hours, it's just you, the dial, and the dark. What you're about to hear are the calls that came in on the nights nobody could explain, ordinary people, on empty highways and in quiet houses, all reaching for the same phone to say the same thing. I've never told anyone this before. Some of these stories are strange. Some are sad. And a few of them still don't have an ending. So settle in. Keep the lights where they are. The lines are open, and tonight, it seems, the dead still have something to say. Let's begin. The phone at my old family diner started ringing just after I flipped off the main road. A quick glance outside showed nothing but endless blackness, no headlights, no signs of life. But that voice on the line, it was too urgent to ignore. "Hello?" I whispered into the receiver. "Mike, are you there?" a trembling voice rasped through the static-laden line. It wasn't one of my regulars. This caller sounded scared, and the name didn't ring any bells. "Who's this? Can you hear me?" I asked, squinting at the screen to find the number. There was no caller ID, just a 4-digit extension code. Yeah, I can hear you," came a muffled voice. "It's late, but I need your help." I clicked my pen against the desk, trying to sound authoritative. "Listen, it's 2 a.m., and I'm alone. What can I do for you?" There was a pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. Then came the first whispers of an eerie tale, about those people who never call back. Her voice cracked on the last word. My spine tingled. "Tell me what happened," I urged gently. "Last night, it started out normal. I got a call at work, late shift as usual." She paused again, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I'm a waitress. We have an old house behind the diner. Like you've seen them, some of us get to see things." Her words felt heavy with a secret, but she went on. "It was around 3 o'clock when my shift ended. The usual lull before the night crew took over. I got a call, just a phone ringing in one of the tables. It made me nervous because it's not something we get often." "Did you answer?" I asked, pushing the pen further into the desk. "Actually, no," she said hesitantly. "But there was someone in the hallway then. A man, tall and dark, with a coat wrapped tightly around him." Her voice faltered as if recalling his gaze. "He looked right at me before walking down the staircase." The line went dead for a moment, and when it crackled back to life, she continued, "I checked the phones later, none of them were answered or ringing. But, my phone buzzed again on the desk. It was that same table in the corner. I didn't answer then either, thinking maybe there was just an error." A deep breath. Then night went by normally. No one mentioned anything out of place. But when morning came and I checked the voicemail, there it was, someone calling me back, right after our diner closed for the night. I felt a cold shiver. "Tell me more," I said, my voice steady but my heart thudding. "I told you, no one answered before, or ever called back afterward. They always just hang up or go to voicemail, never a live person." The caller's voice was getting weaker now, like she might be shaking uncontrollably. I can't keep working there anymore, something bad is going to happen." The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. Then came the final words, "Mike. Can you still hear me? I don't want to just disappear without a word." Her voice broke into a sob, and the line cut out completely. I sat frozen for what felt like hours before clicking off the phone and staring at the now steady stream of numbers displayed. The diner was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. But as I looked up to check the time, my hand hesitated on the clock face. There was no 3 a.m. I picked up the phone again and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. There she had recorded a message: "Mike, did you hear me? Please call back, I need help." The message cut off abruptly. I was alone in the darkness, staring at an empty diner. The only light came from my computer screen, and even that flickered as if struggling. But there was one thing I knew for sure: something just started watching me. The radio hissed and crackled like old paper sizzling on an open flame. In the quiet of midnight, my friend Jake's voice whispered into the air, "You've got to listen to this one." His breath was ragged over the line, a sure sign he needed to get it out. I cleared my throat. "Jake, how can I help you tonight?" "Listen," he said, pausing to gather himself. "I just heard something. Something that's never happened before." "You mean those 3 knocks you always talk about?" I interrupted gently. We had been through this before. Every knock after midnight turned out to be a cat or a dog. "No, it's different." His voice was tight with apprehension, like he was trying not to panic over the phone. "This time, they started last night." My hand clenched around my own half-empty beer glass. The knocking had never been more than a tap on an old wall or a tentative rapping at windows. "Where are you now?" "I'm at home," Jake said with forced calm. "At my parents' house." I remembered the small, quiet town of Savannah where his family was from. An hour's drive from the bustling city, it was as if he had gone back in time a century. "What were these knocks like?" "Like someone trying to get your attention, you know." His words were hesitant, trailing off into an uncomfortable silence. I nodded along, even though I knew Jake couldn't see me. "You heard 3 knocks?" "Yes," he replied softly. "They came just before 2 in the morning, and they woke me up." It happened right when the second knock was followed by a third. A chill crawled down my spine at his description. My mind whirred with possibilities: ghosts, poltergeists, or maybe even just the creak of an old house settling. "That's strange," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "It always happens before someone in the house dies." His eyes widened over the receiver. "I've heard it from other people too, the stories, the same thing." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, despite the warmth of Jake's home office behind me. I pushed down the initial panic. This wasn't just some urban legend or ghost story he was regaling me with. "Okay," I said carefully, "how long has this been going on in your house?" Jake hesitated before answering. "For about a year now. Every time the knocks come, it's the night before someone passes away." I felt a sharp stab of dread. "Do you know who those people are?" "No," he admitted. "Just names, people whose birthdays have been coming up lately and they've gone missing." Silence filled the air for several seconds until Jake continued in a strained voice, "Last night, one of them was in the hospital. They said someone fell from a balcony, then they died last night. It's just too coincidental, too eerie." My stomach churned as I processed his words. The house was old, built in 1890 with thick walls and narrow hallways that whispered secrets from another time. In this place, every knock echoed through the wooden floors like a warning, each 3-knocker foretelling an impending death. "So what are you going to do now?" I asked, trying to sound reassuring. "I don't know," Jake said, his voice breaking. "I think, maybe it's time to leave. To move away from here before the next knock falls." The radio static crackled louder as he hung up, leaving me alone with the memory of 3 knocks in the night and an unanswered question that wouldn't rest until they echoed again. In the quiet of pre-dawn, when the world was asleep and only the radio crackled with static, there was a call from an anonymous number. The midnight host picked up, his deep voice steady against the background noise. "Good evening," he began softly. "This is Midnight Frequency. We're here to listen if you've got something unexplained to share. I heard you had a story about." There it was, the silence that could last mere seconds or creep into an eternity of static and hiss. The host's voice paused, then continued in a calm but more urgent tone. "I can hear you're nervous. Just take your time." The caller cleared their throat. "Yes, this is Jack. From Baton Rouge. I've had something that's been bothering me for years now." "Jack," the host repeated gently, "what is it? A ghostly presence?" Jack's voice trembled slightly. "Not exactly. But it's close." The host nodded into the microphone though no one else could see him. "Go on, Jack." "I remember sitting down at our dinner table whenever I was a kid," Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "3 of us, my dad, my mom, and me. And then this third seat always, it appeared right after. Like someone else had joined the table but they were invisible." The host's question came slow and steady. "How often did that happen?" "A lot," Jack replied, his voice a little stronger now. "Whenever we were expecting to lose someone in the family." The host paused, letting the implications sink in. "Can you tell me more about what happened when the third seat appeared?" "It was always the same," Jack said, almost as if he was reading from a script. "It would slide into place right before my dad got his morning cup of coffee. No one else would see it. But I always did." The host took a deep breath and adjusted the microphone. "How old were you?" "I'd guess around 10, Jack said, his voice growing more confident with each word. "But that's not what's bothering me now. What keeps coming back is this: every time the third seat appeared, it felt like someone was watching us." The host's voice became almost a whisper. "Watching? How do you mean?" Jack took a deep breath, his tone growing darker. "They were never looking at us directly. Just that way, out of the corner of your eye, like they weren't even sure if we noticed them." "Interesting," the host replied. "And what about now? Are you still noticing this presence sometimes?" "No, but it's not gone." Jack swallowed hard. "Something happened a few years ago, around my birthday, and I felt like that third seat was coming back. And when I got to the dinner table, there really was someone else." The host's voice was almost a murmur now. "What did you do?" "I called everyone in." "They didn't see anyone either," Jack said grimly. "But my dad, he got this look on his face like he knew something bad was about to happen. And it did." "What happened?" the host asked gently. Jack paused, then spoke in a quiet, strained voice. "Someone died that night. But I still feel like there's someone sitting at that table with us, even now, years later." The host leaned forward into the microphone, his tone taking on an urgency he hadn't before. "And Jack?" "Yes," Jack said, his voice barely audible. "I'm here for you," the host replied in a soft, reassuring tone. "You're not alone." In the stillness of a winter night in Charleston, Sarah was sprawled on her old armchair, the soft glow of the fireplace casting eerie shadows across the wallpaper. The house was quiet. All that broke the silence was the distant tolling of the grandfather clock at the top of the stairs. It seemed as if the house had been silent for so long, one wondered if it ever truly woke up. Sarah's fingers traced absent-mindedly over a photograph of her grandmother, placed on a small table next to her. Her voice, a whisper in the dim light, said, "I just never expected to be part of that silence." She had always known the clock was odd. It seemed to keep time differently from any other, with an eerie precision. But now, something felt different. The first sign came on New Year's Day. Her aunt had called late in the evening, heartbroken and broken voice filled with worry. "Please come over," she had pleaded, her words heavy with emotion. Sarah had rushed to her side, finding a house that felt unnaturally cold. They were at the hospital now, waiting for news on their father. It was almost midnight when the nurse returned, her face pale. "I'm sorry," she said softly, holding out a small piece of paper, a time stamp from the clock in Sarah's aunt's house, marked with 12:05 a.m. Just as the clock had stopped dead at that precise moment. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, and when they opened again, she picked up the receiver on the old rotary phone by her grandmother's photograph. It rang twice before anyone answered, a soft, muffled tone that seemed to echo through the silence of the house. "Hello?" asked a groggy voice. "Uncle Frank," Sarah began, trying for calm despite the rising knot in her throat. "It's Sarah. How are things with Dad?" "Better now, thank God," he said, relief evident in his voice. But then, just as she was about to hang up, he paused, his tone dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Listen closely," he urged. His breath was heavy on the line. The silence was thick for what felt like an eternity before Frank spoke again. "The clock in the bedroom," he whispered urgently. "It stopped at exactly 1:45 a.m. Sarah's fingers tightened around the phone as she listened, her mind racing with images of empty rooms and still clocks. "I didn't even hear it," she said, her voice barely audible. "Exactly," Frank replied, his tone now urgent. "Just like every other time. Do you hear that?" Sarah strained to listen but heard only the crackle of static in the background. Then came a sharp click followed by a sudden silence. The phone in Sarah's hand was dead. She stood abruptly, moving swiftly through the silent house towards the stairs leading up to the grandfather clock. Her footsteps echoed as she climbed, each step feeling heavier than the last. She reached the door, lifting it to reveal the clock's pendulum still swinging, ticking away the seconds without pause. But at the very minute of her father's passing, it had halted. Sarah stared at the stopped hands for a long moment before turning and retracing her steps down the stairs. The silence was absolute, the only sound her labored breathing. She picked up the phone again, this time cradling it to her ear more firmly. "Uncle Frank," she whispered into the receiver, "it's all I can do now is wait." And then she heard it, a faint ringing, muffled by distance but unmistakable. The clock, she realized, was not stopping just at death. Someone, or something, was taking careful note of each passing moment, ensuring that every second counted. The phone rang again, and Sarah answered with a whisper, "Yes." Her voice caught as the line crackled before going silent once more. She knew now what she had to do. But the thought sent a chill through her. She couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was just the beginning. "Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse." In the quiet of the early morning, when the world seemed to pause between night and dawn, I lay in my bed, listening to the static hiss of the midnight frequency. The late October air was crisp, carrying with it a faint, distant whistle as if the wind itself were whispering secrets. The old house around me creaked gently, the kind of sound that only seems louder at night when you try not to fall asleep. I had been working the graveyard shift at the Oxford pharmacy for almost 2 years now, but every few days, I would let myself drift into that half-awake state where reality and the edge of sleep blurred. It was around 3 a.m., the time when most dreams were nothing more than snippets of memories or fragmented thoughts. But tonight, something felt different. The sound of my phone startled me, a clear tone cutting through the silent night like an alarm bell. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't a call from work or anyone I knew personally. The midnight frequency, though usually unremarkable in its usual chatter and eerie tales, had left this number on my voicemail. I hesitated, then dialed back, watching as the phone rang endlessly into darkness. A young voice eventually picked up, calm but serious. "This is Ethan in Oxford, Mississippi," the caller said. "I have a story I need to tell you." The chill in his tone was enough to make me sit up straighter on my cot. "Go ahead," I replied carefully. Ethan's story unfolded like a slow unraveling of an old mystery. He had been working his night shift at the pharmacy, a mundane task involving checking for expired prescriptions and keeping the stock shelves neat. The building itself was an old stone structure, built in 1920s with a sturdy but creaky wooden frame. Its walls were lined with glass cases full of medicines and herbs, each one telling its own silent story of healing. On that particular night, everything had been routine, another quiet stretch between customers. That is until the bird appeared. "A blackbird," Ethan said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it before." His voice carried a mix of wonder and fear, a feeling I understood all too well. It flew into the pharmacy through an open window. The door wasn't locked, you see, left open for natural light to filter in. I could almost picture him there, surrounded by rows of bottles and jars, listening as the bird entered the building with a soft flutter. My own curiosity began to stir. Such an event was rare enough to warrant attention. Ethan paused, creating a small gap that allowed me to imagine the scene more vividly. The bird circled once or twice, its wings beating softly against the air currents. I stood there, half listening to my routine tasks and half watching it. It was beautiful, almost haunting. Here was the forward hook, the hint of something that might come next. As the story began to take shape, a small seed of unease started to grow in my own mind. I asked him if he had done anything unusual on his shift or noticed any irregularities around the pharmacy. He shook his head slightly, his voice remaining steady but tinged with a hint of tension. "No, everything seemed normal," Ethan said before adding, "but as I watched it, something felt wrong." The final sentence hung in the air like a warning sign. It landed on the counter near where I was standing, and then his voice trailed off, leaving me to wonder what exactly happened next. The static of the radio seemed to amplify my own unease, as if the world outside had paused to listen. And in that moment, Ethan's phone went dead. The silence stretched out for several moments, only broken by the faint sound of the midnight breeze whistling through the background. As I held the receiver to my ear, trying to get a response or any hint of what might come next, it was clear that this story ended where it had begun, unresolved and chilling. Ethan's bird remains in my mind still, circling within the old stone walls of the pharmacy. It left no trace behind, save for the lingering sense of something watching from the shadows. In the quiet of my grandmother's attic, a place I hadn't stepped into since childhood, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. I glanced over at the old, yellowed photographs lining the walls, images of smiling faces and familiar rooms that told stories of yesteryears. But amidst them, there was one photo that never should have been there. It was the photograph taken on my grandmother's 65th birthday, the one she proudly displayed for years. The morning had been ordinary enough. I woke to the usual creaks of old wood and the faint hum of distant traffic. A shift at a nearby chemical plant had left me with a spare hour in the early evening, so I decided to clear out my grandmother's attic before the night closed in on us. As I rifled through boxes, I found a stack of albums that hadn't seen daylight for ages. With a flashlight strapped to my wrist, I began flipping through the pages, each snapshot telling a different story. But as I turned the corner and reached for one specific photo album, something felt wrong. The room seemed heavier, the air colder than before. My hand hovered over an old leather-bound book, its cover marked by wear from decades of handling. I forced myself to pick it up, knowing that curiosity was a trait of my family's, even when no one knew what secrets were tucked inside those pages. As I opened the album and flicked through the first few images, each page turned smoothly, almost too easily. But when I reached the photograph in question, my hand stopped mid-air. The photo was crisp, clearly dated June 15, 20 years ago, just before my grandmother's birthday. It showed a group of 6 people standing around her kitchen table. She sat at one end, smiling brightly, and her 5 friends posed behind her with a mix of joyous faces and casual laughter. I had seen this photo many times, but what happened next never made sense. In the split second it took for my eyes to adjust, another figure appeared in the background. A shadow, darker than anyone else's, materialized beside the smiling group. It didn't move or speak, just stood there like an uninvited guest at a party. I froze, and as I continued staring, a small part of me wondered if the others had seen it too. Back then, none of them mentioned anything unusual that night. The photo was returned to its rightful place in the album, and no one brought up what we had all witnessed. Now, 20 years later, standing alone with only the dim light from my flashlight, I saw something else. Another shadow, even darker this time, appeared beside the first one. It lingered for a moment before vanishing as abruptly as it had come. As I closed the album and put it back on the shelf, I tried to shake off the sensation of being watched. But then, in the quiet of that attic, another thought crept into my mind. If that shadow was taken before the end, what did it mean for me? I left the attic that night, my flashlight turned off, and walked down the empty hallway, feeling a strange sense of foreboding. The next morning, I packed up everything and moved away from Asheville, North Carolina, never looking back. Years have passed since then, but every so often, when I'm deep in sleep or driving on a lonely road at night, I feel that same chill. And I wonder, what if it wasn't just a photograph taken before the end? In the stillness of an early October night, my old truck rumbled through the winding highway, headlights slicing through a thin blanket of fog. The windscreen wipers tapped in time with the engine's low growl as I neared home. A call on my personal line interrupted the quiet hum of the radio. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello," I said, voice muffled by static. A breathy sigh came through the speaker. "Hey," the caller whispered, and I felt an icy shiver run down my spine. "This is Mike in Scranton." The line went dead. Silence, heavy as a tombstone. I pressed play again but heard nothing except the hiss of the phone's circuitry. I parked outside our old family home, a creaking Victorian that had seen better days. As always, the front porch light was on, the steady yellow glow casting long shadows into the empty hallway inside. The house felt like an old friend, until it didn't. "Hello." I called out to no one. No reply, just the echo of my own voice and a distant hum from the basement. Mike's phone rang again. "It's Mike in Scranton," it began before going dead once more. I walked inside, turning on lights as I went. The old house groaned underfoot, every creak and clunk a reminder of its age. As I neared the kitchen, I saw that the basement light was flickering madly, a sickening red hue through the window. I found Mike's phone there, resting on an empty hook by the door. It had been here before. The line buzzed in silence, as if mocking me with its absence. I picked up the receiver, tracing Mike's name across the screen. "Mike," I whispered into it, feeling a cold sweat form. "Are you okay?" No answer. The kitchen was dark. The only light came from a single bulb that cast everything in an eerie amber glow. I flicked through my contacts on my phone, searching for family numbers. The house felt as if it were closing in around me, walls thick with silence and something more sinister. "Mike," I tried again, louder this time. "Are you alive?" The basement light flickered violently one last time before going out entirely. Complete darkness enveloped the room. I knew I should leave, but my feet refused to move. The phone in my hand felt like a lifeline, or at least a promise of something. "Mike. Mike," I said more urgently now, calling from every number I knew, hoping for a response, any sign of life. But there was only the heavy breathing of the night itself, the creaks and groans of an old house waiting for morning to come. I heard it then, a faint whisper, barely audible over the static. "Call me back, please." It was muffled by distance, but unmistakably Mike's voice. I dialed his number again, pressing send with trembling fingers. The phone buzzed in response, and as I held it to my ear, a single, chilling sentence echoed through the line: "It's too late now." At 3 a.m., the dial tone in my old house seemed to linger longer than usual. My landline was supposed to be the last thing I thought about before sleep, but tonight it chimed twice before the operator's voice came through. "Good evening," he said softly. "Welcome to the midnight frequency." I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. "My name is Lucy," I began hesitantly, feeling the warmth of the radiator against the chill in the air. It had been a long night, working the late shift at the general store on Main Street. Now all I wanted was to crawl into bed and forget everything else for a while. Lucy's voice was steady but strained as she spoke. "I'm just here because, well, something happened that I can't shake. It's been eating away at me ever since it happened 3 weeks ago." The host sighed deeply. His calm tone comforted me in a way. He didn't sound like someone who would judge or make light of my story. "Can you tell us what it is about, Lucy?" he asked gently. I hesitated for a moment before continuing, almost whispering. It was so quiet at home that night. I had only just climbed into bed when I heard the phone ring. I rolled over and reached out blindly, groggy from sleep. The cold night had left my skin numb to everything but the sound of that ringing in my ear. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered how every hair on my body stood on end. "I didn't recognize the number," I added softly. "It was just empty, like it wasn't supposed to be there at all." The host remained silent for a moment, allowing me to continue. "I tried to ignore it at first, told myself it must have been my own subconscious playing tricks on me, but it persisted. Eventually, I answered and waited, but no one picked up. Just static." Lucy paused again, the ghost of a smile crossing her face before it disappeared. Then there was this whisper. It was so faint, like a breath against my ear. "Why are you here?" it said, just that one question, repeated over and over like an incantation. The host's voice became even softer. Did the whisper stay on the line? I took a deep breath to steady myself before answering. No, it didn't. But what did was, when I got out of bed, I noticed something strange at my feet. Just this shadowy figure standing by my bedside. The host asked carefully, "What did you see exactly?" "There's not really a way to describe it," Lucy admitted with frustration. "It looked like someone had stood there and then melted into the floorboards. Or maybe just never been there at all." I heard the host take a deep breath before he continued. "Did anything else happen that night, Lucy? Did you feel anything odd?" "I couldn't sleep for hours," she replied softly. "But in the morning, my bed was empty. I checked everything, but it looked like no one had been there all along." The host's voice held a hint of concern. "Lucy, when did this happen?" he asked. 3 weeks ago," she said almost distractedly. "And now every time I go to sleep, I just think." Is that whisper going to be waiting for me too? A pause, heavy with unspoken questions. I haven't been sleeping well since it happened. And tonight. Tonight was the first night since then when someone actually called my house, Lucy concluded in a voice barely audible over the static of the line. The host's voice was calm but held an unmistakable chill. Lucy, can you describe that whisper again? I heard, "Why are you here?" she whispered. Over and over. It made me wonder. Who is waiting for me at home each night? You're listening to the Midnight Frequency. Keep the lights where they are. In the quiet of February, when the snow was crisp and heavy on the ground, I drove home down a long stretch of road that seemed to disappear into the darkness. The headlights cut through the icy twilight, casting eerie shadows on the empty fields and trees passing by. It was one of those days, the kind where the world outside felt just as cold and unfeeling as my emotions inside. I had an extra shift at the vet clinic tonight. Dr. Thompson always joked that I should change into a hazmat suit before coming in, it was so chilly. The howling started even before I walked through the door of the small veterinary office. It was a dog's wail, deep and mournful, echoing in my chest like an old memory. The office was deserted as usual, just me and the sound of the refrigerator humming softly in the back room. A shiver ran down my spine. The howling seemed to follow me through the hallways. I could almost feel its presence tugging at me from inside a closed door, like a siren's call. I found myself standing before Dr. Thompson's office, a door that was always locked behind him. On this night though, it wasn't just locked, it was open, and the sound seemed to be coming from within. The wail grew louder, more intense, as I approached the door. My heart pounded in my ears. "Hello." I called out softly, pushing the door fully open. Inside, it was dark, only a sliver of light leaked through the gap under the doorway from the hallway beyond. And then, the dog howled again, directly at me. I could see nothing but darkness and silence, and yet, the sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I stepped forward, flashlight in hand, trying to make out some shape or form in that blackness, but it remained as elusive as a ghost. The wails grew into shrieks, and I could feel the hair rising on my arms. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Yet, as I shone my light around the room, it found nothing but an empty desk, medical supplies scattered about, and a closed window with its glass shattered, as if by a violent storm. I called out one last time, but there was no answer. The howling stopped suddenly, leaving me alone in that eerily silent space. I didn't wait long before backing out of the office. But just as I reached for the door handle, it turned on its own. Before my eyes, the room came to life with dim lighting from unknown sources. Shadows danced along the walls, and the sound, so close now, was not that of a dog at all. It was faint, but unmistakable, a human coughing, followed by a soft sob. Then, a voice, barely audible, "Don't leave, please don't go." My heart raced as I spun around, searching for any sign of movement in the darkness. Yet everything appeared still and silent. The only thing that moved was my flashlight beam, which picked out a shadowed figure in the corner, a shape I couldn't identify clearly. And then it happened again, the same howling, but this time, louder. I heard it outside the open doorway, beyond where I knew there were no animals, no life left to make such sounds. It was as if something had returned, something that shouldn't have been inside or outside at all. In a panic, I tried to retreat, but my hand found nothing when I reached for the light switch. The power flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled, trying to find an escape route through this nightmare. Suddenly, from nowhere, a voice whispered, "It's too late." And then, silence. Complete, Unbroken silence that echoed with the weight of something unseen but very real. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash, locking it in place. Now alone, I waited for what felt like an eternity, my breath fogging up the glass of the now closed window. The snow outside continued to fall, as if unaware of the terror inside. And there, just before that tiny sliver of light from the hallway, sat a howling darkness waiting for me. The dog's wail grew louder still, as if mocking my presence, calling out into the night, where it belonged, not in this room at all. The phone rang at 2 a.m., an eerie, insistent buzzing that cut through my sleepy consciousness. I was working the graveyard shift as a maintenance tech in an old New Orleans house-turned museum, and it wasn't just any call. It was from inside one of the exhibits. "Hello," I whispered into the static-laden line. "It's 2:15, a voice said, soft but with an edge. "Not much longer." I felt my pulse quicken, my breath hitching in my throat. This wasn't just any anonymous caller, there was something unsettling about their tone and the timing of the call. The museum was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the distant hum of the air conditioning and the soft creaks of the wooden floors as I made my way towards the phone. It rang again, insistent, and I tried to steady myself. "Who is this?" I asked, glancing around the dimly lit room. Shadows danced on the walls, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. "This," came a whisper from behind me, "is just a start." I spun around, heart pounding wildly. But there was nothing there, no one else in the room besides myself and the figure at the exhibit window. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam scanning the glass pane of an old-fashioned dollhouse. Through the fogged-up glass, I saw the outline of a woman dressed all in black, her face obscured by shadows. "Who are you?" I demanded, pressing closer to the exhibit. The static on the line grew louder, as if someone was actively turning up the volume from far away. "I am the next," she replied softly. "And it will be soon." The air around me seemed to grow colder, and the phone call continued, almost tauntingly. I could hear my own breath now, rapid and ragged. The woman in black at the window stared back, unblinking, her presence heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. "Tonight," she whispered, as if reading my thoughts. "I will be coming for you." The line went dead as suddenly as it had begun, leaving me alone with my lingering fear and an unsettling sense of dread. The woman in black at the window still watched from behind the glass, waiting, and I knew then that I wasn't the only one who would be getting a call very soon. In the quiet town of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, there was no time to think as I pulled into my drive. The digital clock on my dashboard showed 3:47 a.m., but it felt like the middle of an eternal night. My wife was supposed to be home from her graveyard shift at the hospital by now. Or maybe she should have been. I turned off the car and walked past the familiar house, my steps muffled in the damp grass. The porch light cast an eerie glow over the lawn. I knocked on the door, but it remained stubbornly silent. Then, I noticed the front window was open a crack, and from inside came a faint hum of the TV, a signal that my wife should still be there. I stepped inside, the creaking of floorboards beneath me creating an unsettling rhythm. I switched on the hall light, and the sudden burst of brightness made the room seem bigger, the darkness around it more pressing. The house was dimly lit, and dust motes danced in the thin strip of moonlight filtering through the curtains. I went straight to the kitchen where my wife usually kept her snacks. Her purse was gone from its usual spot on the counter, and I felt a flicker of unease. As I reached for a mug, a peculiar stillness settled over me, a silence that seemed more like an absence than a lack of sound. That's when I saw it, a candle flame flickering in the dining room. The room was dark except for the flame, casting long shadows and barely visible wisps of smoke rising from the wick. It should have been my wife's candle, I knew her routine. She always left it burning when she went to bed. My heart began to race as I approached the dining table with a cautious step. The flame was steady enough, but as soon as I stepped into the room, the flame guttered out, extinguishing in an instant, without any wind, without anything touching it. It simply died like someone had blown out the light, yet no one had been near. I stood there, the sound of my breath growing louder in the suddenly quiet house. The flame's death felt ominous, a presence that whispered and then went silent. I turned to leave, but something stopped me, a small voice inside telling me I should investigate further. So, I crossed back to the dining table and glanced around. Nothing moved, no shadows shifted, no doors creaked, just the oppressive silence of the night. My footsteps echoed off the walls as I circled the table, trying to find an explanation. But as soon as I returned to the center, the flame flickered again, then suddenly blew out once more. Panic rose in my chest like a flood. The house wasn't reacting the way it was supposed to, like someone was playing tricks with time and space themselves. My grip tightened on the nearest object, a ceramic bowl. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for its moment to strike again. I stepped into the hallway and closed the dining room door behind me, only to hear the candle's flame gutter out again, this time not through my own action but by an unseen force. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there in the darkening hall, listening intently for any sign of movement or a whispered word from the unknown. And then it happened, the phone rang. The voice crackled over the static-filled line. "Hello? Hello?" I paused, squinting into the dark studio as I reached for the phone. "This is Midnight Frequency," my calm, deep voice said into the microphone. "Who's there? Can you hear me?" A momentary silence, and then a faint whisper, "I need to talk." "Sure, anything you can share with us tonight will be valuable," I replied softly. The caller let out a heavy sigh, as if the act of speaking was an effort beyond their strength. "My name is Jack," he said finally. "It's about what happened last night at my sister's house, where I'm supposed to spend the night." "Jack, can you tell me more?" I asked gently. "I'm not sure." Jack hesitated, his voice barely audible over the static. "I had a visitor. But no one else saw them. No one heard anything." "You didn't actually see anyone, did you?" I prodded, my heart starting to race with curiosity and a sense of something dark. "No," he said slowly, his words stretched like shadows. "Just felt it. Like someone was watching me." A shiver seemed to ripple through the line, followed by silence, a moment of thick dread that hung in the air between us. "Can you describe what happened exactly?" I pressed on, knowing this was where the story would grow darker and more unsettling. "Yeah," Jack's voice dropped into a whisper. "I'd been up late, working at the factory. My shift ended late, but they wouldn't let me off, said there were parts that needed to be checked. So, I made sure everything was secure before heading home." "All right, take your time," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. "When I got here, it was like a chill just washed over the house. It wasn't cold, more of an eerie feeling that crept up on me. I walked through the empty foyer and into the kitchen where we keep food for emergencies. There were no lights on, but everything looked normal. Yet something seemed off." "Tell me more about this room," I prompted. "There's a spare bedroom my sister was trying to renovate. She had a lot of old furniture piled up inside. Just as I passed her door, I saw a figure standing just outside the frame. It was too dark to see clearly, but it was definitely someone familiar." "Did anyone else notice this?" I asked. "No," Jack said, his voice shaking. "When my sister came home from work, no one had seen anything. She thought I must have been delirious or just really tired from the night shift. Can you describe what the figure looked like? I inquired softly. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. Jack's words were trailing off now. She wore my sister's old pajamas, loose and untidy, as if they had been pulled on quickly. So, this person appeared to be wearing your sister's clothes? I tried to keep the tension at bay. Yeah, that's what I thought too. But when I went back to the room after a while, nothing. Just an empty frame of where she'd been standing, Jack said, his voice thick with unease. There were no traces of anyone having entered. Did you tell your sister about this? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She wouldn't believe me. She thought I was crazy. But every night since then, I've seen it again. It's always the same, that figure standing just outside her bedroom door. Jack sighed deeply. Every time I go into town for supplies or anything, she's still watching. A heavy silence fell between us, and I could feel the dread creeping in like cold shadows. So, you've been seeing this visitor every night? I asked again. Yes, Jack whispered. And it's not getting any better. Just more unsettling. His voice was barely above a whisper now. Jack, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up tonight? Not really, he said softly. I just wanted someone to hear this. The line went dead after that, leaving behind only the static of the midnight airwaves. I sat there for a moment longer, thinking about Jack and his chilling experience. Is anyone listening? I asked aloud into the microphone, though I knew the answer would remain unknown. This next call came in just after 3, the hour they say the veil is thinnest. It's 2 a.m. in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm sitting alone in my grandmother's old house. The air conditioner hums softly, but it can't mask the silence that fills every corner of the place. The only sound is the distant ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hall. It's been so long since anyone else was here, just me, a single call on hold with your show. I should be asleep, but something keeps me awake, something strange. The house creaks around me as if it's alive, like it remembers better times when this place buzzed with life. Now, it feels too quiet, the walls thick and unyielding, like secrets hidden behind each panel. My grandmother passed away 3 months ago, her will revealing a part of our family history I never knew, my great-uncle's tragic story from over a century ago. Among his possessions, there was an old mirror that had been locked in the attic for years. After reading about it, I couldn't shake off the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the mirror held more than a reflection. Last night, I made my way to the attic, careful with every step, and opened the lid of the trunk where the mirror was hidden. The glass was covered in dust, but as soon as I lifted it, the air grew colder. The silence seemed to thicken around me, and I could feel eyes watching me from behind. Without a second thought, I placed the cover back over the mirror, but that's not what scared me. It was the realization that every time I had touched the glass, a faint whisper echoed in my mind, "Cover it up." I hurried down to my bedroom, my fingers trembling as I closed and locked the trunk. The house felt heavier now, each step echoing like the distant sound of footsteps. Tonight, I couldn't resist. I slipped out of bed quietly, making sure not to disturb anyone else, and found myself drawn back upstairs to the attic. The old mirror was still there, untouched since last night. But something had changed. A chilling breeze seeped through the cracks of the wooden floorboards, carrying with it the faint sound of crying. I approached the trunk cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. When I uncovered the mirror, nothing seemed different at first glance, just a dusty reflection of an old mirror on a cold night. But as I stared, my breath caught. In the glass, a figure appeared, a woman with long, dark hair and piercing green eyes staring back at me. Before I could scream or move, she began to fade, but not before whispering one word clearly: never. The door to the attic creaked open silently behind me. Panic set in as I dropped the cover and turned around. The woman was gone, replaced by the usual quiet of the night, but I knew, there's always something more. The phone on my nightstand rang sharply, pulling me away from that eerie silence. Hello. My voice was barely audible over the static. Callie. Is everything okay? It's Sarah, a friend who knows about my late-night calls. Yeah, I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. Just needed some advice. There's no way out of this now. The phone call from Sarah only made the silence more pressing, as if it was waiting for me to acknowledge what lurks behind that mirror. The mirror that must be covered. The whispered words echoing in my mind. Are they just memories, or something else entirely? I hang up and look back at the trunk. Can I go through with it again? Cover it up, maybe forever. At 3 a.m., as I lay in my dimly lit apartment in Scranton, the phone began to ring. I hesitated, then grabbed it, pressing it against my ear despite the static crackling through the line. This is Midnight Frequency, came the calm voice from the other end. Call us if something's been troubling you. Hello? I said into the receiver. There was a pause that felt like it stretched over minutes. Then, a low sigh on the line. My name is Mike. I work nights at St. Joseph's Hospital in Scranton. His words were soft, almost muffled by the silence of the night. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Mike, how can we help you tonight? He spoke slowly, his voice like the whispering wind through empty corridors. It's about a patient I had, 3 years ago now. She was a young woman, Anna. Only 25. A shiver ran down my spine, and I wished I could see the face on Mike's face, that he might look away from the dimly lit room full of medical charts and patient records. The night shift is always quiet, Mike continued. All the patients are asleep or in a deep, drug-induced state. But Anna was different. She had a severe injury, fractured ribs, broken wrist, but she was awake during her recovery. His voice faltered slightly as if he were choosing his next words carefully. Anna would call me over to her room every few hours. I'd check on her vitals and make sure she wasn't in pain. She'd thank me with a small smile and then ask about the hospital's history, specifically the old wards where nurses used to work. My heart skipped a beat, something felt off, like the air had grown colder. What did you tell her about them? I asked. She knew more than she should, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the static. Every time I mentioned a nurse or doctor who worked there before, Anna would look at me with this, knowing gaze. I could feel my own skin prickle as Mike went on to describe how Anna seemed to anticipate everything that was going to happen next, almost like she had been warned. She asked about the ghosts in Ward 12, Mike said. The ones who allegedly didn't move on to the afterlife. Said they still lingered, touching patients in ways no one could see. Now I understood why he called at this hour. It was more than just a story now. It felt real. Mike, you believe she knew something, I said, my voice steady but growing concerned. It wasn't until the night of my shift that everything changed. Mike paused for a moment as if gathering his thoughts before continuing. I went in to check on Anna because her pulse was erratic again. He described how he found her lying still on her side, almost as if asleep, and approached carefully, not wanting to wake her. But then, I heard it. A faint whispering noise that echoed through the room. And something touched my wrist, so gently I nearly missed it. I could almost feel the coldness as Mike recounted what happened next. Anna was gone from the bed. The light on her heart monitor flickered for a moment before stabilizing again. She was fine, but there was no way she could have moved without making noise. Mike's voice had grown colder, and I knew he wasn't done yet. There was more to this story. What happened next? I asked, almost unwillingly. I can't say, Mike replied softly. Because when I turned around, standing just inside the doorway of Ward 12, were two figures, a woman in a nurse's uniform and another in white coat. And they both had their hands extended toward me, as if inviting me to follow them. And then Mike hung up. The line went silent except for the hiss of static. A cold chill ran down my spine, an unsettling feeling that lingered long after the call ended. The name was clear as day, etched into the foggy pane like someone had drawn it with their own breath. Sarah squinted at the small, neat letters, her heart pounding as if the ghostly hand had just traced them there. She was alone in the old farmhouse, the night radio talk show playing softly on a dusty radio in one corner of the kitchen. She had been driving all day for this job interview. Portland's southern edge seemed to stretch endlessly with empty highways and endless fields. At 3 a.m., she hadn't expected to even be home long enough for dinner. The house was old, creaky, its walls whispering secrets of decades past as they settled into the chill of a Maine winter. Sarah rubbed her hands over her arms, shivering despite the heat from the oven. Her interview went well. The manager had been impressed with Sarah's enthusiasm and experience. She could have stayed and celebrated, but she needed to get home. This job would secure her for a few more years, at least. Back in Portland. The name on the window, Sarah. It wasn't a joke. The penmanship was deliberate, neat, as if someone had taken their time to write it clearly before departing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she should have noticed something amiss. Her colleague's eyes darting, the manager's knowing smile. She walked over to the window, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. The draft from outside sent tendrils of fog dancing across the glass. Sarah focused intently, trying to spot a ghost in the mist. There were no fingerprints, no sign of touch, just an empty space that had been occupied and then left alone. The name still stared at her. Her phone rang suddenly, startling her. She jumped back with a hiss, startled. She hadn't turned on any ringtones before going to bed. Tingles ran up her spine as she fumbled for the receiver, trying not to look into the window again. Hello. Are you still in Portland? A voice, quiet and urgent, filled the line. Yes, why do you ask? I've just left the city myself, said the caller with a tremor that Sarah could almost feel. It's late, but I needed to call someone. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. I'm here, she repeated, as if it could comfort both of them. You have a name written on your window. Sarah. The voice faded slightly before continuing. They're still after you, aren't they? After a moment of silence, Sarah whispered, Who are? Don't worry about that now, the caller said softly. Just be careful. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone in her hand, then back to the window. The name was still there. She could almost see the ghostly hand leaving traces of its presence. And now she knew it wasn't just a prank, a very old, very quiet one that had been waiting for her all night. The phone in my apartment rang again. I squinted at the tiny screen that showed only a single digit, 5. Could it really be you? My mind raced, trying to remember why someone would call from that number. As an office worker who never worked nights and rarely received calls after dark, this wasn't just unusual, it was eerie. With trembling fingers, I picked up the receiver, my breath hitching as the static crackled in my ear. Hello. My voice came out softer than a whisper, barely audible over the hiss of the line. A pause. Then, "Are you sure this is your number? It keeps ringing." I blinked hard, glancing around my small studio apartment. The walls were lined with books on history and philosophy, but today, I was only looking at my computer screen, which flashed with a project due tomorrow morning. "No one should be calling me." "Ma'am," the voice continued, "have you ever heard of this?" Another pause. The room seemed colder all of a sudden. My fingers felt numb as they gripped the phone tighter, almost hard enough to crack it. My stomach twisted into knots, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry," I said, my words catching in my throat, "but I don't know who you are." "You're about to hear a story that happened to me," the man on the other end said softly, as if reading from a script. His words were like cold wind whistling through an empty house. "It's a story about a chair that faced the wrong way." A small shiver ran down my spine, and I nodded even though no one could see me. Something about this felt off, as if time itself was slipping out of place in the quiet night. "All right," I said, trying to push through the unease, "go on." The man paused again, his voice lowering to a somber whisper. "There were these chairs, old wooden ones, like they'd been there for ages. One had always faced away from the door, no one knew why, but no one dared move it either. It was just, out of place. But everyone ignored it. I couldn't help but notice that my own back was against the wall now, pressing me into the cool surface. The air felt thinner than usual. Then I got a call from an old friend," he said, his voice thick with nostalgia. "She needed to borrow some furniture for her place in the small town she just moved to. One of those chairs would fit perfectly," she said. I hesitated but eventually agreed. My mind replayed the scene, my neighbor's daughter driving over with a box of items on the tailgate of her old pickup truck. She had insisted on staying too long, something about a late night and needing help. She mentioned a chair, he continued, an old one from an attic. It was plain but elegant, with a strange story attached to it, she said. I didn't think much of it at the time. His words began to meld into an uneasy silence, and I could almost feel the tension in my own throat as I waited for him to continue. It turned out her town had quite an interesting past, he went on, but what happened after that, well, let's just say the chair faced a different direction than it used to. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering into the silence of the room. I stared at where it lay, my hand reaching out but not quite touching. Had anyone heard me drop it? A deep breath, then another. "Go on," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. "Before you can say goodbye, there's a knock on your front door. You answer, and the chair is facing the wrong way this time, towards the door instead of away. And inside, nobody." I bit down hard on my lip, feeling the sharp pain as if it were proof that I was still in control. "You know what happens next," he said slowly. "Bad news always comes from a direction no one expects. The chair facing the wrong way." The line went dead. Silence filled my apartment, thick and heavy. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat echoing the dread that had settled over me like a blanket. And in the darkness of my room, I couldn't help but wonder if something was still looking at me from those cold wooden eyes. If you're still with us, good. A lot of people stopped listening alone after this one. The song echoed in the stillness of midnight like an old radio left on too long. I was a night shift worker at Country Sound Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, when it happened. The place was quiet that evening, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and dusty guitars. The clock on my desk read 12:45 a.m., but the sound seemed to come from much, much earlier. It began simply enough, just a faint melody, no lyrics at first. I knew it instantly, it was Silent Night. But this wasn't my usual Christmas music playlist, it played every holiday without fail. This time, it felt wrong. The studio was empty save for me and the echo of that familiar tune. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for our late-night paranormal hotline, hoping someone might have a clue about what I was hearing. "Midnight Frequency," said a calm, deep voice. "This is your host. What's troubling you tonight?" I took a steadying breath. "It's just this hymn. It won't stop. Silent Night. It's been playing for hours." My host hummed sympathetically. "Do you mind if I try to dig up some information on the song, then perhaps we can find out where it might be coming from?" I sighed, hoping he could help make sense of this eerie occurrence. The next day, Christmas Eve, was unusually calm at the studio. The song continued its haunting melody over my radio, and by morning, I began to notice how people in town seemed oddly quiet, as if they too were listening. That night, just before heading home, I decided to investigate further. I went to the old church on Church Street, an imposing edifice with towering spires that loomed over the neighborhood like a silent guardian. As I approached, the air grew colder, and my breath formed visible clouds in front of me. Inside, the pews were empty, but the hymnal pages turned by themselves. The song played louder now, almost deafening. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, like whispers carried on the wind, or echoes bouncing off the walls. Suddenly, I saw a shadow moving near the organ. It was my friend, Sarah, whom everyone had believed lost in a terrible accident years before. She turned to me with eyes that held no life. Her lips moved silently as she sang "Silent Night," her voice soft and melancholic. As she faded into the darkness, I screamed. The radio clicked off, leaving only a hollow silence. When I returned home, my host was waiting on the line. We found an old recording of "Silent Night" in our archives. It's dated, from just before your friend's supposed disappearance. I hung up, unable to process what I had witnessed. The phone rang again, but before I could pick up, there it was, the song, echoing once more through the empty house. What does that melody mean? Who is singing that haunting tune in my home now? The radio plays "Silent Night" endlessly as if waiting for me to leave, and I don't know if I can. Amidst the gentle hum of a night shift's routine, where the clock never seemed to tick quite right, there was something familiar about the way the seconds ground to a halt. It was late, too late even by West Virginia standards, with the only company being the quiet hiss of the ventilation system and the distant echo of a siren down Route 381. The air was crisp, the kind that whispers secrets in your ear, especially when you're alone. Eddie Harper leaned back into the vinyl seat of the old shift supervisor's desk, his head heavy with the day's work. The night crew had just finished their last sweep of the plant, and he was ready to call it a day, until the phone rang. A chill ran down his spine as he picked up, the static on the line barely holding its own against the howling wind outside. "Midnight Frequency," a calm voice greeted him, smooth but slightly strained. "This is Eddie from Wheeling," he replied, trying to sound casual despite the unease gnawing at him. "What's this about?" There was a pause, thick and heavy, as if something had paused too. Just like his watch, which lay untouched in his pocket, frozen at 3:35. "Listen up," the voice said again, softer now. "I have something you might be interested in." The radio crackled, then fell silent. Eddie hesitated, feeling like he was straddling a nightmare threshold. But curiosity overcame his hesitation. "Go on," he whispered. "You remember when your watch stopped?" the caller asked, their voice barely a breath against the static. Eddie's brow furrowed. "Yeah, how could I forget? It just froze there." "Well, you're not alone in that memory. Or maybe, you are." The radio static began to pick up again, like it was trying to break through some invisible wall. I had a friend who found his watch stopped at the exact same time. Eddie's pulse quickened. Wait, your friend? You mean? Exactly, the voice said, and Eddie felt the phone slip slightly in his hand. The cold grip of the receiver made him shiver. His name was Jake. The voice paused, and Eddie could feel a small silence hanging in the air. What happened to him? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. There was another long pause. Then, one moment they were both here, then one was gone. Eddie's heart sank as the line grew quiet. He could almost imagine the darkness swallowing up any hint of human warmth. The words that came next left him feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. The watch stopped at exactly the same time, the voice whispered, so faint it might have been his own fear echoing back. At 3:35. Eddie's fingers trembled around the phone, clutching it as if it could protect him from the emptiness that seemed to be closing in. The line was silent now, a void where human sound should have been. As Eddie hung up the phone and turned off the radio, he couldn't help but wonder what had stopped his watch at 3:35, and if there was more to the story than just an ordinary moment of stillness. The static crackled in my ear like old bones creaking. I squinted into the gloom of midnight, my hand hovering over the receiver as if it might leap away at any moment. It had been a long shift at the factory, and my wife lay sleeping soundly beside me. The phone rang again. Hello. I whispered into the earpiece, voice trembling slightly from sleep deprivation and the weight of an approaching funeral. The host's voice was warm, reassuring, as always. Good evening, sir. You've reached the midnight frequency. A late-night listening companion for those who seek something more than silence. His tone was tranquil, but there was a faint, unspoken urgency that I couldn't quite place. Thank you for calling, he continued. Could you share with us the story from tonight? I paused, gathering my thoughts in the darkened room of our trailer in Oxford, Mississippi. The telephone line seemed to hum with anticipation, as if listening with me. I think something strange is happening outside, I said hesitantly. It's the night before my sister-in-law's funeral. The host nodded, though I couldn't see his response. Please tell us what you're experiencing. I took a deep breath and began. The funeral was tomorrow at noon in the old family cemetery on the edge of town. A sense of dread had settled over me since I'd heard my nephew's news. But tonight, it was something else. Late last night, while I was sitting on the front porch with a glass of whiskey, I noticed an odd thing, a rocking motion. My sister-in-law's old swing set is outside and usually doesn't move, but that night, as if someone, or something, was sitting there gently pushing. A small silence stretched between us. Can you describe this rocking more? The host prompted. I closed my eyes for a moment to recall those moments clearly. It was like a child's swing, slow at first, almost imperceptible, then faster and steadier. The wood creaked slightly, but not enough to break into silence. The host hummed softly, a sound that seemed to encourage me forward. I called out several times, Helen. Is this you? But there was no answer, just the swing's rhythmic motion. Eventually, I went inside and fell asleep, but when I woke up, it had stopped. The next morning, no one else reported seeing anyone on the porch. The host's voice remained calm, yet I could hear the subtle undercurrent of unease. Could you describe what the porch looked like that night? I described the scene, the old rocking chair swaying ever so slightly in the cool breeze, the dark trees closing in around it, a sky just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. By the time I checked outside again, there was no movement at all. But it was as if the swing had known when I would go back inside. Like someone, or something, was aware that my presence mattered. There was a moment of silence before the host spoke again, his voice thoughtful. Do you recall anything else unusual about that evening? A chill slithered down my spine. No. But ever since then, every time I think about it, there's a feeling, like something unseen is still out there on the porch, watching. Thank you for sharing this with us tonight, the host said softly. I hope our show has helped to alleviate some of the stress leading up to your sister-in-law's funeral. My fingers tightened around the receiver, clutching it as if it might provide a physical shield against whatever lingered outside. Will there be more callers sharing their stories like this? The host paused before answering. Yes, we are here every night for those who have tales to tell and questions they can't answer. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hung up with a mix of unease and something else, hope maybe, that someone understood the strange, unexplainable things that lurk in the dark. The silence on the line left an echo in my mind as I turned out the light and slid into bed. The rocking swing waited patiently outside until dawn's light finally banished its mystery, or did it? The static on my radio is a familiar companion at 3:17 a.m. when I finally decide to turn it on. The soft hum and crackling noise is comforting in its predictability, but tonight's signal is unusually weak, as if something were trying hard not to be heard. I'm in Bangor, Maine, my sleepy fingers clutching the phone receiver. The house feels empty even though I've just returned from an overnight shift at the diner. Hello, the host says, his voice deep and steady, cutting through the static. Is everything all right there, sir? I clear my throat, trying to sound normal, but my mind is already wandering to a place it shouldn't. Yeah, I think so, I say, as if convincing myself more than him. Some stories come in loud and clear, he continues, others are like whispers in the night. This one is different. You've got something on your mind, don't you? I shift uncomfortably in my seat, the cold of the living room seeping through me. Well, I was just thinking about a time when things were a bit stranger, I say, my voice barely above a whisper. The host pauses for a moment, allowing the silence to hang between us before he speaks again. Can you tell us more? I take a deep breath. It's been months since that night, but remembering it feels like yesterday. It was at the wake of my grandmother's sister, I start slowly. There is a long pause on the line. The host just lets me talk, and for some reason, that makes the story feel more real. Can you tell us her name? Lila, I say. We called her Lila. She passed away about 6 months ago, but it was like she'd come back to stay. The static intensifies as if something is scrambling the signal. The host's voice becomes fainter, almost a ghost of itself. What do you mean by that? I squeeze my eyes shut, remembering. It started on the night before her funeral, I say, my voice trembling slightly. We were in the old family house where Lila used to live. It was just me and my uncle because everyone else had already arrived at church. There is a low hum on the line, like a distant engine starting up. What happened next? I can hear it now, that nagging sensation I couldn't shake off for days afterward. The house seemed cold. Unusual for such a warm night. The windows were all closed, but still, it felt like an icy wind was creeping through the halls. The host's voice returns, clearer this time. And then came the ringing phone in Lila's bedroom. It rang and rang, as if desperate to be answered. We were already planning on staying out of that room, I say, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising knot in my stomach. But something about it felt wrong. Do you remember answering? I shiver, recalling the coldness of that phone. No, I admit. It was her old rotary dial one. It's always been a strange thing around here. But by the time it stopped ringing, the room was empty. The static fades in and out as if something is moving closer to us. What did you do then? I went to investigate. The door was locked from the inside, I say, my breath hitching. It's usually unlocked. There is a moment of silence, thick with tension. Did anyone else hear anything? No, I whisper. But when I got back downstairs, there were these shadows in the corner by the kitchen window. The host's voice breaks through again, his tone urgent now. Describe them for us. They weren't just dark spots, I say, my mind racing to form words. They looked like people. Like they were trying to make a shape but couldn't quite finish it. A low hum builds on the line, rising in pitch until it sounds almost like someone weeping softly. Did you see who or what those shadows were? I saw Lila, I say, my voice barely audible. She was there, standing at the window, watching me through her shoulders. The static crescendos into a cacophony of sound. The host's voice is distorted now, as if speaking from miles away. And then, I can't finish it. My throat feels like it's closing up. Then she was gone when I tried to go back upstairs. The host says nothing for a long moment, and when he speaks again, his words are mere whispers. Do you remember the last thing you said to her? No, I say, my voice cracking. Not really. There is a pause so long that it feels like an eternity. Thank you, the host finally says. His voice sounds tinny and faint on the line. For sharing that with us tonight. Before I can respond, the static engulfs everything, cutting off any chance to continue my story. The phone goes dead as silently as it had come on. And in that moment, I hear a soft whisper at the edge of my consciousness, come back, come home. Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse. The radio hissed with static, and in the dead of night, something whispered into the void. Tommy, is it really you? It was 2 a.m., and I was on a late shift at Salem General Hospital, a small, old building that seemed to creak along with my haunted thoughts. I flipped through my clipboard, feeling the chill in the air seep deeper than the cold of winter. My mind wandered to Tommy, a young friend who had gone missing 6 months ago, his last known address an empty lot near the hospital. Tonight was the anniversary of when he vanished, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was amiss. The night was quiet, save for the occasional car driving by on the empty streets outside. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number, another one of those phantom calls I'd grown accustomed to since Tommy disappeared. The static crackled louder as I picked up the receiver, pressing it to my ear. A voice that shouldn't have been there spoke softly, almost inaudibly. Tommy, I echoed, hope surging like an electrical current through me. But something was wrong. This wasn't just a whisper, it felt like a presence, as if someone were using his voice box without air. Tommy, please, what is this? The static grew more persistent, but then there was a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to resonate from within the phone itself. Then, suddenly, a sentence. It didn't matter who had spoken it or why. The words were clear and deliberate, chillingly so, Tommy. I'm sorry. I can't take any more. The line went dead before my eyes could adjust to see any sign of where the call originated. I sat there, paralyzed, as the hospital's lights flickered in the background. Was this some kind of prank? A cruel joke? Or something far more sinister that lingered in the old halls and empty corners of Salem General Hospital? For a moment, I thought about hanging up, but I needed to hear more. I pressed redial, and the line buzzed again with static. Nothing. The only sound was my own breathing, heavy with dread. The hum returned, fainter this time. Tommy, I whispered, trying desperately to reach out through the silence. The static swelled, almost like a living entity pressing against the phone's earpiece. This isn't real, I told myself, but the fear gnawed at me, growing with each second. "Tommy, you're not here anymore," a final whisper echoed in my ears, and then all was still. The phone line went dead. The phone rang sharply in the quiet of midnight, startling me awake. In the dim light from my bedside lamp, I squinted at the screen of the old analog phone. Its staticky voice was already there, crackling with eager anticipation, and as the first words tumbled out, I knew that another story, another voice, was about to share their fears. "The frequency is alive," whispered the midnight host. "Tonight, something has crept into our airwaves from an ordinary night of restless sleep." I cleared my throat, feeling the cold creeping up from the floorboards beneath me. "My name's Jason, and I'm calling from a small town in New England." The phone was still alive, whispering back with static. "Jason," repeated the host, his voice steady but slightly pitched as if he were miles away, "please tell us your story." "Well," I began, my fingers fumbling for the remote to turn up the volume. "It's about this old house I used to work in, you know, a shift at night." The host waited, the static hissing like a restless breath. "In the middle of the night, around 3 o'clock or so, there's always that moment when everything feels still and wrong." I sat up straighter on the edge of my bed. "I'd have to walk down this long, narrow hallway at work every night. It's just a simple old house, but I swear something lurks in its walls." The static made an uneven hiss, punctuated by silence. "The hallway's only got one light switch. And that's always off. But you see, there's this moment when the lights are out, when everything should be still, and then, a light begins to appear at the end of the hall." I paused, thinking about how the light would come and go, teasing me like an unyielding phantom. The first few times it happened, I'd think it was just my imagination. Maybe it's a draft or something. But no, this thing's persistent. The host's voice cut through the static with a calm certainty. "And what about now? Has this light become more real?" I shivered, feeling the chill of the night seeping through the walls. "It feels like it's getting closer each time I walk down that hallway. Like it knows when I'm coming." The static hummed and crackled, building to a crescendo. "This isn't just about seeing things out of the corner of my eye either. It's an eerie light, brighter than anything else in the house, and as it grows stronger, so does this sense that something is watching me." The host's voice echoed softly. "What happens when you reach the end of the hall?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to find the words to describe the dread building inside me. "When I get there, sometimes, just before turning on the light at the end of the hall is almost in front of me." The phone's static hissed louder, as if it were holding its breath. "And when I finally flip that switch, nothing. There's no light at all." There was a long silence. The host's voice broke through again, soft and probing. "And what do you see then?" I held my breath, feeling the weight of the question. "Just darkness. Complete darkness, like the switch itself has turned off time. And that's where we'll close the lines for tonight. If you made it this far, if you're still here in the dark with me, then you're one of us now. The ones who listen after midnight. The ones who don't quite turn the radio all the way off. Before you go, do one thing. Subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week we bring another lost night back from the static, and you don't want to miss the frequency when it opens again. Until then, keep a light on. Check the locks. And if your phone rings after 3, and there's only static on the other end, you don't have to answer. This has been the Midnight Frequency. Good night. And sleep with the radio on.